Where is their curiosity? Where is someone feeling that sense of intrigue or invitation to something more from the inside out? This is what I think is so critical. If you keep going on this journey, I do think it ultimately is going to start to get you in tune with those subtle messages that, or even that discontent that's within you. And that's where this adventure begins.
Are you in Wisconsin?
Yes, exactly. Good call. Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay.
So about an hour and 20 minutes from Chicago, actually.
Lovely.
Just along Lake Michigan. Love it here.
Beautiful. Yeah, I heard it's really beautiful. We have another Humble Mind member who's been on the podcast as well. She's originally from Wisconsin. Her name is Karen Walsh. An amazing person. But she lives in Phoenix now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. She left the cold for warmer weather.
yeah, a lot warmer. Yeah. So but yeah, amazing to think about those places. I haven't been yet.
Well, Granada, I love. I've been there 3 times.
You have?
Wonderful.
Okay, no way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went in high school on a Spain trip, fell in love with Spain. I went back in college when I lived in Denia, south of Valencia, for exactly 6 months. And then it changed my life. And then I went, my family I did a sabbatical in Malaga. So we popped up to Granada. And that's when my kids were like 7, 6, and 3. We spent a month in Spain. It was fantastic.
Wow, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, what do you know? Okay.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Wow.
Yeah.
No, amazing. And there's such different places and different areas as well of Spain.
That's what I love about it. It's like go up to Galicia, it's totally different, or Catalan. It's like all different. It's amazing.
It's like, especially in the north, it's like Ireland. It's just so different. And then, you head to the south and then it's like, almost desert like in some of the areas. So it's really a country of a lot of space and a lot of different, bits of variety, which is cool.
Yeah. How long have you been there?
I've been here since it's just over 7 years now. So we first were in Valencia at first in the city for the first 3 years, and then we wanted something different. We bought a car, got out of the city, and now we're just outside of Granada in the south. Yeah, which is a little more. I think it's a little more to our taste in terms of kind of being out of the city in the country. Yeah. Letting my
so
little
how far
animals.
Outside the city are you?
Half an hour. Yeah, closer to the coast. Yeah.
Okay.
So between Granada and the coast. Yeah, pretty much smack bang in the middle. Yeah, it's a beautiful kind of valley here. We can see the foothills of the Sierra Nevada.
Wow.
If you've been to Granada, I'm sure you've seen those amazing. I don't know if you were ever here in the winter, but it's just incredible.
So we were there in like February when I was in college, and some of my classmates peeled off for the day and went skiing. I wish I would have done that, but whatever.
Okay. Whatever. Who needs those guys?
They broke the rules and they went off and skied, and I just stayed in line. So
you showed them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, I'm really happy that you're here and that we're getting to talk. So for everyone who's listening, welcome back to the Humble Mind podcast. It's great to have you here. I'm very happy to have Ben Katt on in conversation with us today. He's a teacher, he's a coach, he's a storyteller, and he's also the author of a book called The Way Home: Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife. And I've been very, very attracted to some of the stuff that Ben has put out over the last couple of months, and what eventually led to our conversation here, where we got to, where I think there's quite a lot of overlap in terms of looking at the hero's journey as a way of, I suppose, making sense and making deeper meaning of life, especially in some of those periods of time where there might seem to be a complete shortage of meaning. So I'm really, really keen to talk today and just to kind of dive into what you've learned, not just as a framework for what the hero's journey is, and we can talk a bit about that, but perhaps your own hero's journey, and what's led you to the people and the places and the decisions so far. So welcome.
Thank you, Alex. So good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, wonderful, man. So I hope I did your kind of introduction justice there. I'm sure you're much more than just those things, as we all are.
Well, these things shift like every couple months, right? It's like, how
Yeah.
do I define it now?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's a kaleidoscope. But yeah, at the same time, through some of my own experiences of understanding and coming across the hero's journey as this kind of mythical sort of architecture of storytelling, if you like. I think a lot of it originated from some of the research and the writings of Joseph Campbell and, a couple of others as well. And there's some archetypal psychology in there too. And quite a few episodes in the past of our podcast have kind of gone into this through a few different lenses. But I would love to just start at the beginning and kind of get your take on what exactly is the hero's journey, perhaps for some people who've maybe not really heard the term before. And what's a simple way of sort of just trying to understand it and understanding its value to us potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. Let's start with Joseph Campbell briefly, just because he's the one who coined that term. And he was a 20th century mythologist who looked at, spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions, religions, myth, folklore. And as he looked at these stories and practices, ritual practices as well, he saw this single pattern, which he called the monomyth, like a single storyline kind of running through it all, this that showed up again and again. And later he named that the hero's journey. And Campbell had something like 17 stages or steps, but he put them in three different categories, which are departure, initiation, and return. Now, part of the power he saw in this hero's journey framework was, yes, this is the story of someone, say, in a myth, the hero. But what myths ultimately are at the end of the day, these are ways of collecting human experience and communicating in a way so that we can make sense of our own lives. So, and yes, you are right. He did interact with, there's other influences there. So lots of people we could give credit to. But part of why his work is so enduring is people like George Lucas and other Hollywood types came across it and they're like, wow, this is what we're trying to do when we tell a story, right? So Luke Skywalker, or I mean, you could look at Harry Potter. I mean, you can look at all these different stories. But I had my own journey. It was basically a 5-year inner quest, soul descent, where I really was separating. I really realized that who I was and how I'd moved through the world just wasn't working for me anymore. It wasn't serving me. So I went on this journey, and that's really what I explore in the book. But when I came out of it, I was getting into Campbell's work again. And as I was reading it, I was like, this is what I lived. This is what I experienced, right? So it resonated with me at a deeper level than maybe it had at first pass. And that's part of what led me to begin to reflect on my own story and figure out how could I share this story through the lens of the hero's journey in a way that really, I kind of say everyday people can understand. And I'll sort of wrap up here with saying I frame it as the three phases as I experience them. I just talk about it's what Campbell's talking about it, but I talk about it as leaving the familiar, falling into the unknown, and rising to wholeness.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I'm fairly familiar with the stages, but I love how you've kind of almost redefined that. And maybe just perhaps to kind of really make it nice and clear in people's minds, let's follow the sort of the Star Wars example. And I'm following this because I'm a Star Wars fan. So yeah, bear with me. But perhaps, looking at those three sort of stages. So you've got Luke Skywalker, at least, starting at the beginning, which means we're starting at episode 4. So I hope all the prequel nuts don't hate me. But we're starting at the beginning where you've got, the boy, the young man. Normally it is a young man, isn't it? It's kind of a young man who's sometimes there's a background of tragedy. Sometimes he's an orphan. Sometimes there's he's still untested in some way, but still feels the call, the yearning, or hears the call. I think that's part of it too, isn't it? And then how would you, if you were looking at sort of Star Wars as a model, maybe you
Yes.
can just run us
So
through
you
that.
have Luke Skywalker. He's living with his aunt and uncle, I
Yeah.
think, right? And it's the ordinary world, is how Campbell would talk about it. We could say it's the status quo. It's where
Yeah.
things are. There's sort of this formulaic way of being. It's what he knows. It's all he knows. And then it always begins for Campbell is there's a call. He calls it the call to adventure, which is a phrase a lot of people are familiar with. But there's some kind of interruption, something there, and I really see it. It's an invitation into another way of being, into an adventure, right? But it breaks, it interrupts what's going on. And so in his case, I think his right, he's like their home is raided and his grandparent,
Yes.
his aunt and uncle are murdered. So as the hero continues, then so he's expunged from the world he knew, and so suddenly he's in this unfamiliar terrain, right? And what always happens in these stories is there's help arrives in some form, and in Star Wars, at least the first version of that is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
Of course,
The
there's more
sage.
versions of help, right? It's the sage, it's a wise teacher, it's a guide who comes alongside the protagonist. Um, then there's the stage of the unfamiliar, or what Campbell talks about as the initiation. This is where there's lots of phrases, but it's like the dark night of the soul, the road of
Yes.
trials, the underworld. And this is where that main character, so Luke, he faces all these trials and challenges and foes. I can't remember all the specifics in episode 4, but I know there's a bunch of challenges, right? He has to go through. He
Trash
meets
compactor.
others.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Right. The trash compactor. Well, there we go. Right. He meets a whole bunch of other allies and support too,
Yes. Along
with
the way.
Han Solo and R2D2 and C3PO. So there's this band traveling through this, but really it is our story. Like we're experiencing something through him. Though interestingly, we could say all the Star Wars spin-offs later were like, well, let's give Han Solo his hero's journey. We give
Yes.
everyone their experience of this. But ultimately, there's the hero has to um, undergoes a sort of death, which then also leads to that hero, in a sense, their rebirth and their return home. Is that the Death Star blowing up, the first Death Star?
Yes. Yeah. There are a number of them. Yeah,
There's a
but
lot of Death Stars.
yeah. But they all blow up eventually. Yeah.
Yes. And, ultimately, this is not until later, right? We find out that, spoiler alert, Darth Vader is actually Luke's father. But right, that image in itself of like confronting this, like the enemy being someone that's almost, it's like himself in a way. We can
Yes.
actually even remember, right? He has this vision
Yes.
where the helmet of Darth Vader comes off and he sees his own face. So really, ultimately, the hero is facing something in themselves, right? That's part of what they're working through. Now, in the hero's journey story, often there's a lot of conquering, vanquishing, defeating dragons and this kind of thing. And there's a place for that. But I think when reflected, when we kind of look at this for our own lives, what I like to see it as is this isn't about like conquering or cutting off or shaming or judging former versions of ourselves. This really is the work of integration. That's what this is acknowledging there's aspects of who we've been that served us at one point. They helped us navigate the world. But ultimately, they begin to interfere and maybe harm and hinder us from growing into who we need to be. So less sort of lightsabers and blowing up Death Stars in our own personal journey, but there's just so many parallels with these myths and then modern takes on those stories for our own lives.
Yeah, and it's so interesting from a storytelling perspective as well, because we're seeing these sorts of stories again and again. There's bits of it in old stories like Beowulf or Parsifal. There's another one, Hamlet, maybe. It's just, there's even right down to Star Wars and to Harry Potter in a modern context. And it's so interesting how it's the same structure, the same pattern, the same kind of up and down, the facing of the shadow, the eventual triumph, and the kind of the maturation of the person inside, the person you're meant to be. There's destiny, these big themes. But it's so interesting how, we kind of just need to be able to insert new characters or a new environment in there, and we're still happy as an audience or audiences, maybe not just in movies and entertainment, but in books and the kinds of mythologies that keep us alive, that we're always happy to hear that same story again and again.
Yeah.
And how it needs to be repeated and how we need to stay close to it, to stay familiar to it. So because it seems to scratch an itch. How would you see that?
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I think I have, there's sort of two feelings coming up for me. As one is, I love that we are drawn to these stories, and because even at a subtle, maybe a subconscious level, they're shaping us and influencing us. And yet sometimes I'm thinking, especially today, these stories are everywhere, and part of what it's almost like we become numb to them, or we kind of get lulled into being asleep in the sense of we're not necessarily engaging them as like, what does this say for my life? What does it mean for me? We become content, potentially just living vicariously through the stories of these imagined characters,
Yes.
or I would say real characters, like the kinds of biographies and biopics and story. We love the story of someone who had it all, lost it all, right? And then like a phoenix rising from the ashes, like comes back, whether that's an athlete or someone who went into financial
Or
ruin, or
president.
or a president, or we love these stories.
Yeah.
But I think there's a more, and that's great. But what I'm really interested in is how can we shift from just like living vicariously through another, and rather viewing this, and this is that second thing that was coming up for me as you're talking, is see this at these are always invitations for us. And the reality is, very at multiple points in our life, we we've lost the plot, like we've lost the storyline of who we are and why we're here. And so to come into contact with this pattern in a variety of stories is an incredible gift for us, because it can help reorient us to where we've been, where we are, and give us a bit of a map to move forward into this greater sense of aliveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just going back to Joseph Campbell, who was an amazing scholar as well, just such a sharp guy. But a lot of the things that he explored in his books, when I was reading and listening to some of them, was so many reference to Eastern wisdom and Eastern philosophy. In fact, he made me get a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which was awesome, which I come back to a couple times a year, and how so many of these stories have these sorts of it's almost like if you go back far enough, it's all mythological. There's no way to prove whether things are true or not, but that's not where their value comes from. Their value comes from being able to be passed down, for the morals to be understood, for the fact that there are, no matter where you are, which age you're in, where you live, there are these kind of recurring, repeating forces that we live with and that we need to learn how to coexist with in life, whether that's greed or, certain sins, or the fact that life is meaningless and mostly banal, and we have to, do the best we can while we're here, or, love, or all of these kind of themes, seem to kind of be as old as we are, which is so interesting.
Well, yeah, and the idea of myth, I'm trying to be careful now in saying, using myth as a word meaning something made up or false, and that's just very much in the vocabulary.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because it's so much more than that.
Oh, that's just a myth. That's not real. But as you're saying there, and that, as Campbell points out and so many others, the reality is, because these myths, these stories, they were all really about helping people become more human, as they made sense of creation or origin stories, or the battles between the gods, or whatever the thing is. It was all about helping people. Really, it was like a map for life, which in that sense, myths are like the truest of true. They're, like you're saying, they're the truest kind of story we could tell, even if all the characters are imagined. And that's where it's, I have a background in Christianity, grew up in the church, and I was an ordained minister for a number of years, and ultimately left that. That's a whole other conversation. But it gave me, one of the great gifts of it is it got me acquainted with, you could say, mythical literature, but it was also in a context where so many people were, there was this obsession with like, is this real or is this true? And you end up with very dogmatic approach to things that ends up
Yes.
squeezing out the life of some of these powerful ancient stories in terms of what they have to say to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose we're always reappropriating something, and there's good and bad examples or good and bad reasons for doing that over time. But it's also just what we do. You mentioned, and you've alluded to it, in your work and on your website, that you've also been through your own hero's journey, or parts of it, or perhaps you're still maturing through it.
Mm.
Would you want to share some of kind of what happened to you and what you found out along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this is, you mentioned Campbell, what a brilliant scholar he was. And I think part of, if you get The Hero with a Thousand Faces, that's a pretty dense book and incredible references to all these different ancient cultures and stories. But part of what I felt compelled to do, I was like, most people aren't going to read this, and yet they've heard of the hero's journey.
Mm.
And so after I went through my own experience, I really had this sense of calling to like create something using my own story, interacting with Campbell's work to give people a sort of guidebook for navigating these experiences. So what I'll say is, I mentioned, I was actually an ordained minister as a pastor for about 10 years. I was living in Seattle. It was amazing, meaningful, impactful work. We were working with people dealing with addiction, mental illness, homelessness, like a lot of complex issues resulting from trauma. And but over time that caught up with me. And specifically, I received a call to adventure in a mystical kind of way one morning. So I was out for a jog, and I was about to charge up this hill, about to turn home, and these words just like rose up in my heart and said, "If you don't have your heart, you have nothing. If you don't have your heart, you have nothing." It's like this inner voice,
Mm.
and that was the beginning. Now, of course, there were precursors to that stuff that I was avoiding, but it was this wake up call that initially I realized how burned out I was because I was so into that work and trying to help people, trying to save people in a way. I don't just like really get their needs met and take care of them, and I lost myself in it. So that
Mm.
began this journey, and I, peel back the layers. Well, why am I burned out? I was my early 30s. Um, my wife and I had been married for a number of years. She was in grad school. We had three kids in short succession. Had been a part of starting and leading three kind of scrappy community-based nonprofit orgs, including the church. And I just realized, like, okay, wow, there's this animating force beneath that burnout that led to it. And it was this allegiance to what I sometimes talk about as a three-headed monster, but achievement, perfection, and performing to please other people. Really thinking that, if I could, do those things, then I will earn love and acceptance from others.
Mm.
This was my operating pattern for a good part of my life. And there's reasons for why it was sort of an adaptive pattern, right? Learn to function that way. But ultimately, my own journey was to really face those things and investigate, like, where did that pattern come from? And what would it look like? This has been the way I've been moving through the world. What would it look like to actually let go of this? If I let go of this, then who am I? Right.
Mm.
So that plunged me into the unknown. Again, this took over 5 years, but there's this profound period of disorientation where on the surface, you could look at my life and be like, oh, yeah, there's Ben. He's doing that job. He's got his kids and he's having a good time over here. But like internally, I was in a sense on my own kind of quiet inner quest. And part of why I highlight that for people is sometimes we think I need to exit my life, need to get away from all my responsibilities.
Yes.
That's the only way that I can do this inner work or go on an inner journey. But no, it is possible. It is possible. And I actually think really valuable to do it in the midst of daily life, right? So ultimately that did lead to me leaving roles and like leaving my role as a pastor and leaving my affiliation with church. But that wasn't like, that's not the core. That's not what I center in the book, because what I'm really talking about is leaving or letting go of the thing behind the thing, those
Mm.
are limiting ways of being, right? And so this journey, it could bring someone right back to the same office in the same workplace where they've been forever. They're just more whole and integrated, or it could lead to what others would describe as, wow, you've totally reinvented your life. But if we start at the surface and we don't go on the inner work, I think we're going to find that we're still, we're just like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic if we're not tending to that deeper stuff. So the journey involved, I'll just say, a lot of practices, and I really see kind of three components to my framing of the hero's journey. You have the mythical pattern. I put it in 10 easy steps compared to Campbell's 17. But then there's ritual practices. So the power and the importance of contemplative practices, well-being practices, mindfulness, lots of ways to talk about that. And the other piece for me is really this, I call it mystical presence. It's a way of saying, regardless of what you believe or don't believe, but really, it's really important to move through these moments in our life with a sense of openness and even, dare I say, surrender to something more, whatever you want to call it. You could just call it that, soul or spirit or God or divine or nature, universe, whatever, the force, we could say. But those subtle impulses, they start subtly, but sometimes they get louder. Are we in tune with our own forms of inner knowing and actually cultivating that? Because that's the thing that's our North Star that's going to guide us back to ourselves.
Yeah, beautifully said. It reminds me of something that I read a few days ago where I can't remember if it was one of the founder of eventually what became the Stoic movement, but in ancient Greece, there was this kind of profound realization that, the universe provides the kind of the underlying template for the order of things, which I suppose now we would say, yeah, that's just the laws of nature, how things work makes sense. But I suppose to them there was something really quite profound in that, because it allows us to be able to experience how, what they might say is within the mind of God, or every single thing carries the essence of its own creation, whether it's a person or a rock or a mountain or a drop in the ocean. And so the nature in harmony and the universal kind of orchestra playing together is what you see, is its own kind of reflection, pouring out out of itself, And so because of that, whatever nature produces must be good, or must be the order of how we come to know, or how the universe comes to know itself. It's kind of circular in a way. I don't think I'm doing it very, doing it justice there, but it's a really beautiful kind of thing to be able to not just cognitively make sense of, but just like you said, the word surrender, to be able to surrender to, because there are forces that are out there, that are within us, not just out there, but that are around us, that surround us all the time. And they are there whether you are, choosing to ignore them or acknowledge them, and they're going to continue to do what they do, and you can choose to be part of it and allow it and to let it flow, or you can try and fight it and to control it. And we always know how that ends up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I just want to jump in there to say, I really recommend the work of Dr. Lisa Miller to people. She's from Columbia University, studying the brain and spirituality. And what her work, she got a book called The Awakened Brain, and it really speaks to what you're talking about from a scientific perspective. So if people are a little hesitant around the sort of more spiritual, she says her research shows we are wired for spiritual awareness. We're absolutely wired for it, to notice signs, to pick up on synchronicities, to experience a sense of connection with something more, to feel that love for our fellow human. She's got all these major markers that she talks about. And the shift that she is really pointing out and looking at what this actually looks like at a brain level, but it's moving from what she calls achievement awareness to awakened awareness. And achievement awareness is, we can imagine, it is controlled, it's focused, it's narrow, it's I am the author of everything, I'm in charge, I need to control and manipulate my world. Whereas awakened awareness sees us as part of some broader thing, right? As part of nature, and that there are other forces, do we want to be co-conspirators with the emergence of our own life, or do we want to just sort of rigidly attempt to build it on our own?
Yeah, absolutely. I love asking people, not just on the podcast, but just as much as I can, this particular question, because it doesn't take very long for us to kind of agree on, all of these beautiful principles and to explore them deeply. But I'm always curious how they are phrasing and articulating these kinds of questions, these kinds of conversations to people, or perhaps, let's say, people working in leadership, people with careers, people with deadlines and high pressure jobs. How is that communicated? And have you found an interesting or compelling or effective way to articulate not just the benefits, because it's about, hey, do more meditating, you'll feel better. Great, but because sometimes it is that simple, but at the same time, there's something there. There's, like you said, the thing behind the thing. And until we're aware of what those blocks are and can make contact with it, we're powerless to them. So is there a way that you approach those sorts of conversations in a useful way?
Well, I love that question. There's like 10 directions I want to go with it. But what I'm thinking of is I was in this conversation with someone who's like in the financial sector, and he was asking me, he's like, but say you're at a conference, you're in the hallway and someone comes up to you and they're like, you've just shared all this stuff, hero's journey, inner knowing, blah, blah, blah. He's like, and it's like, um, what would you say to if they were like, why does this matter? Why does this matter to me? Like, why does it matter? And he's like, what would you say? And the words that came to me, and I come back to these a lot, were like, it doesn't matter until it matters. And what I mean is, this is this pattern, this hero's journey. This is something that um, it only matters when you are at a phase, or even moving from achievement to awakened awareness, we could say. It only matters when you start to sense that there's this incongruence between what you are, what you're doing in the world, how you're showing up in your work, in your relationships. When there's this incongruence between that and like who you know yourself to be, or even the mystery and questions about who you are that are beneath that. This stuff only matters for someone who has some sense that there's a gap there, or there's some inner shift wanting to take place. Now, it could be small and subtle and quiet, or it could be someone who's like, I've known this for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and I just cannot move forward like this anymore. So I start with that because I really think this is never something I would want to force on anyone and start to say, oh, well, your life, wow, you really need to go on the inner journey. There's more there. No, it's really, where is their curiosity? Where is someone feeling that sense of intrigue or invitation to something more? So then, from the bottom up, it's from the inside out. This is what I think is so critical. Like, so any issues you're experiencing up here in your work or whatever, yes, we can get at those with mindfulness practices. I teach meditation, so if you want to reduce stress, this will be powerful. If you keep going on this journey, though, I do think it ultimately is going to start to get you in tune with those sort of subtle messages that, or even that discontent that's within you, and that's where this adventure begins.
And even it might even get to the point where those messages stop being subtle, and they begin showing up in the form of illness or all sorts of other really ugly manifestations of not noticing. And that's why the word invitation is very powerful. I'm a huge fan of David White, and he talks a lot about invitation and conversation and the kind of the beautiful dance between those two. It's invitation is so important because it requires us to acknowledge, but also to kind of assent to the change. No one can force that change on you. No one can, put you in a corner and kind of drug you and deprive you of sleep, and then kind of like, it's still a choice that you make. This sort of the conscious decision required in order to do it, which is why that invitation has to be accepted. It has to be taken, right?
Yeah, and you're picking up on something that's really important to me, which is you don't have to wait for your life to fall apart to say yes to that call to adventure, right? Or to answer that invitation. So, but if you notice, even at a subtle level, or the volume's been slowly increasing, like, hey man, this doesn't work anymore. Like something's got to give. You got to lean into that. And practices are an important part of how we say yes, slowing down, getting quiet, There's lots of stuff we can talk about in that realm, but part of my own story is like, my story isn't actually that dramatic. It's not. So I always love it when people give me the opportunity to share it, but because there was this profound kind of mystical moment I paid
Yes.
attention to. But part of what I'm saying is like, this is not, you don't have to wait for something extraordinary. You don't have to wait for your life to blow up. Like, just begin to take that, just pay attention and begin. So yeah, like you said, this call doesn't get louder and louder with like illness and loss and all kinds of pain. It doesn't need to get there. We
Mm-hmm.
can say yes earlier when it starts with a whisper.
I love what you say because it, we're so used to living life on sort of extremes. And often those are dopamine fueled. Sometimes those are kind of achievement and recognition fueled. But it means that we're looking for these kind of extreme signs, which also by implication means that you end up missing all the subtle ones. And so if it's not, helicopters and jumping out of airplanes and explosions, then it's like, well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing,
Yeah,
until
yeah,
it's like, boom, third stage cancer
yeah,
kind of thing,
yeah.
And so you're so right.
And then it matters, right? It doesn't matter
Yeah.
until it matters. Then it matters.
Yeah.
But let's notice that it actually matters a lot sooner than that moment.
You said something really interesting there in your reference to practices. You mentioned being quiet. I was watching a clip of David Foster Wallace, who's no longer with us, amazing mind, great writer. And he was talking about the importance of being quiet, and that kind of related to him about, the fact that we don't really like to read anymore because it involves sitting quietly, not doing anything else, and concentrating and reading, which I thought was amazing and obviously so true. You say a little bit more about being quiet, the value of being quiet, and maybe even how someone who struggles with being quiet can try and achieve that for themselves a little more easily.
Yeah. So you can imagine someone who is a lifelong striver, as I was, when that call to adventure came. I was in a transition with one of my work roles. And so and I was like, there was something going on. So I paid attention. Thank goodness. I paid attention. I actually had a meeting with a mentor that same day as that morning run. If you don't have your
Mm.
heart, you have nothing, when that message came. So there was my Obi-Wan Kenobi. He actually listened to me. It was very kind. And he bought me a journal that day. And he's like, write it down. Like, you got to reflect on this. And I had a lifelong journaling process and realized that at some point it shifted from like going inward and looking inward to this looking forward, trying to figure things out and
Yeah.
strategize and all that. So that was like sort of the first phase of my moving into quiet, was with that practice. But as I was saying, as the lifelong striver, you can imagine like old habits die hard. And so within a year or two, I'm starting to like get this whole, yes, some transition to happen with work, but now I'm starting to make all these plans for what I'm going to do next. And one day I'm rambling about all this stuff to my wife. It's like, what should I do with this project? Should I go here, do it that way? And I was like, what would you say? And she just paused and she goes, get quiet. She said, get
Mm.
quiet. Now that was different than be quiet, right? Which, that's maybe a different thing in a relationship. But get
Yeah.
quiet, I knew what she was saying is like, slow down, get out of your head, get into your heart.
Mm.
And I look at that moment as like I was on the verge of letting go of these old operating patterns. I'd been on the verge, but then I was sort of relapsing back into them. And she gave me this powerful invitation to like, no, for you really to let go, Ben, and enter into another way, you've got to learn to step into quiet. Um, so yes, there are many practices, meditation, journaling, time in nature. We
Mm.
could name a whole bunch. Um, but the quiet piece is for me, it's just acknowledging that I think it really is a movement from our heads to our heart. And practically speaking, so it's recognizing there's a lot of noise up here, and that can be helpful. But typically, a lot of that noise is going to be connected to who we've been. And to get
Mm.
in touch with what wants to emerge, we have got to, through these practices, find ways to go within and just slowly, regularly And in microdoses is fine, right? You don't have to go on a retreat for 2 weeks. But it's like a daily practice that you can get back
Yeah.
in touch with that quiet. And I do ultimately think, and there's a lot more we could unpack here, but that quiet, that inner stillness, that is the source of our creativity.
Yes.
That is the source of us, that's out of which the place out of which we will detect our moment to moment purpose that's always evolving. So I do believe, like, I function fundamentally at a different level. And I would say it's that quiet that is the animating force in my life. I always, contemplation on its own, okay, fine. But I think it always leads to, there's always contemplation and action.
Mm.
Stillness leads to movement. Quiet leads to expression. Um, but we can't really separate these things out. And we're over indexed on the action expression
Yeah.
piece in our world. So anyways, you can see I should be quiet now about getting quiet.
No, beautiful, beautifully said. And I appreciate how you kind of articulated those as kind of spectrums of the same thing. And how we're not allowing enough visibility across the fuller spectrum, because we're over prioritizing visible productivity and visible action and visible kind of results and outcomes. I often say that, insisting on outcomes is the opposite of curiosity. Because when you're trying to control how something needs to turn out, you're insisting that it needs to be one way and that you know what that way is. But in seeing things for what they are, and the fact that, if you're going to be curious about something and how it might be different and how it might require a different course of action or a different approach to doing something, then it means that you're going to have to let go of what you thought you needed to do and what you thought it had to turn out to, to be.
Yes.
You have to have that openness and a sense of playfulness, to say, well, what would happen if we do this? What would happen if we do that? Let's see. Let's see, and not insist on what it has to be. That's, where curiosity starts. And I suppose also, if you're saying this to a high performer or, someone who really wants to over-index on that productivity, that's a really hard thing to accept.
Yeah.
Because it feels like we're wasting time.
We're wasting time.
Yeah.
And yet, where is there, and so in some ways you can't answer this question until you've lived it in some ways, but like, what actually takes more work? What takes more effort? Is it that striving, productivity, obsessed, like, here's the agenda, I'm sticking to it, we're forcing things, like, is that the path? Or is it the path of curiosity actually is, there's less effort required? I mean, why is it? It's like, why is it that people are like, oh, then I was in the shower and I had this brilliant idea and it like unlocked everything? Well, because you're not like, there's no agenda in there. And it's like you're allowing things to settle. And in that place, you can notice something else emerging. So that's why it's like, with anyone I'm supporting in meditation, I just don't have time for it. I don't have time. And I can definitely actually, I mean, I get it, but I like to appeal, especially to productivity people. It's like, well, actually, let me tell you, this will make you more efficient and productive. It will. You give like 2% of your day to this thing, it's going to transform the other 98.
Yeah.
That'll get them in the door, maybe. And then they got to get that experience of it. And they realize, oh, wow, like I have been, again, I've been all in on this approach and I've been neglecting this other aspect, which really does lead to creativity and insight that I'm looking for.
Can you say something about wholeness? I remember reading, kind of the distinction that you make on kind of wholeness, to be whole, and kind of the different parts of ourselves. Like, maybe you can say a bit more about how you see that.
Yeah. So Parker Palmer, who's a author, educator, activist, who's got this great book called Let Your Life Speak. Highly recommend it. Tiny little book. And he's got another, maybe a hidden wholeness, but he really talks about wholeness is not, he says, wholeness is not perfection. He's very clear on that. And it is about this, integrating or welcoming of all the different parts of ourselves.
Mm.
So as I see, and this is why I love calling it not just a hero's journey, but a hero's journey to wholeness, that points out kind of what our destination is. And actually the journey is the destination in this case, where as we are um, investigating our own story, getting curious about these patterns, or I actually talk about them as the masks we wear. It's the part of how we present ourselves to the world.
Mm.
And it's these learned behaviors from when we were young, maybe because our family of origin, maybe our religious upbringing, maybe just societal, cultural perspectives on gender and things like that. But we learn to wear these things to keep us safe, to get our needs met, help us fit in, help us navigate the world. And so these parts of ourselves, achiever emerges and helps me in a lot of ways. Oh
Mm.
my goodness, helps me in a lot of ways. But get to a point where it's now keeping me from, say more creativity, more curiosity, more aliveness. It's actually become oppressive. So this journey towards wholeness is about acknowledging, like, what are those masks I've worn? Getting curious, and why did I wear them? What did it give me? What am I grateful for? But also, what grief do I carry as a result of
Mm.
wearing that mask? And so, wholeness is getting acquainted with that. Wholeness is also, there's sort of another phase to that, which is moves us into the shadow work, which is acknowledging those, the mask in a way. It's things we can kind of detect. Yes, I show up this way. It's just we've come to define ourselves by these things. Shadow, it is really, it's these parts of ourselves we don't want to be true. We don't even want to acknowledge to be true. It's hard for us
Yeah.
to see, right? We usually notice our shadow in things that drive us nuts about other people or things that we judge in others. It's
So true.
it's saying something about us, right? So there's that work that's part of wholeness. There's acknowledging the pain, our wounds. There's the grief we carry individually and collectively. I really see this journey towards wholeness is just acknowledging that all of these different things we're carrying, these different ways of being, these different emotions, these the particularities of our own story, and it's carrying it forward. It's blessing it. It's not cutting any of it off, and also acknowledging that some of it will no longer serve us, right? Or it needs
Mm.
to be now achiever or productivity needs to be in its proper place, and that proper place is in service to something deeper, which I would say, it's in service of soul and the soul's calling and what
Mm.
what the deepest part of who I am, what that wants to bring forth. Now, oh wow, okay, Ben, you know how to get some shit done. That's good. But let's have that be serving this deeper part of who I am as opposed to taking the lead, right?
Mm.
Which leads to some emptiness. So wholeness at the end of the day, it's about integrating all these different aspects of who we've been and our story. And living. And then really there's another component I should say, which is step 10 of my framework for the hero's journey. It's Campbell talks about this too, but it's this begin again. It's this idea like the journey, like you complete one phase of your own development and evolution, but then there's always another phase. And I'm in another one right now, right? Um, so wholeness is also, it's like we're spiraling upward into increasing levels of wholeness. It's not necessarily like
Yes.
I've arrived, I'm all set.
Yeah, and I mean, you used the word integrate, which comes from the Latin integrare, which means to make whole,
Yes,
which is
yes.
beautiful. Yeah, but it also, I think, it's certain levels of wholeness. It also implies that there's part of the hero's journey there as well in our own journey in the fabric of our lives, which will rely on us being able to be in community with the right people. You can't do it alone. You can't exist in a vacuum. It's not possible to accomplish alone. I don't think it was meant to be something where you can do it all alone. And so, I mean, it's a big focus for me. I'm a huge believer in communities, in intimate communities, for influence, for trust, for collaborating, for doing great things together, for pooling talent. And that's because I've seen it, in so many different forms of the power of the right people in the circle to be able to help, to get involved, to make things better, to fix, to improve. And so at some point that becomes, I think, not just an individual journey, but a social journey. as well as
Yes,
part of that
I love
spiral
that.
upwards.
I mean, I really think so. In that first phase of leaving the familiar, step two, get help, right? Or the help arrives, the Obi-Wan Kenobi or my mentor.
Mm.
Um, and then there's that unknown, phase two, falling to the unknown. There's something about it. There's still help there. There are forces that are on our
Mm.
side, but it can feel profoundly alone. And part of that is we have to get reconnected with the bottom of who we are, right? Sort of
Mm.
like the deepest part of ourself. And then in that third phase, rising to wholeness, there's the return home. That's the seventh step. And this is about reintegration. So we're more integrated now. We're also reintegrating with the world that we left behind, but we're changed, which means there's going to be an impact, right? And so
Yes.
sometimes that's going to mean some renegotiating relationships, maybe some new boundaries. It might mean the end of some relationships. And to your point, it's absolutely going to involve finding those people who can be our community and who are in a sense on the same wavelength and maybe collaborators for um leading to the eighth step, give your gift. Like there's a gift we give, and so we find people with
Mm.
whom we can do that. And I do think Campbell calls it the boon. It's the treasure that you seek. Ultimately it is yourself, but then it comes flowing outward into the world. And I am there with you. I do not think if you get to the end of this inner journey and it just is still about you and you're on your own and you're sort of self-absorbed or it's just
Mm.
improved your livelihood or something like that and it hasn't impacted the community or family or world around you in a generative way, I think it's a sign that like no, you're still like keep going. There's some more work to do there
Yes.
because becoming a more a healed, a more whole, healed presence is about so that you can help make others more whole and bring healing wherever you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's the famous last step of the 12-step program, in addiction and recovery, help someone else, right? The act of service.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful because it helps to sort of close the circle that you started. And without that last step being taken, without that next person being helped by what you've learned and now what you're essentially helping to put into practice, not for yourself, but for someone else, you're actually putting it into practice for yourself.
So right. And at the risk of stretching things, but we'll come back to Luke Skywalker. When we see movies 7, 8, 9, people are like, oh, this is the same story. Like with Rey, it's like she's Luke. And now Luke is Obi-Wan and or Yoda or whatever. But it's like, yeah, because he's a little reluctant at first, but whatever. We'll give him a break. But the idea is you do go from that person who, it doesn't mean you don't need help and receive help later, but you go on this journey, then you are ready and you're capable, you're sort of at the service of nature and how it wants to use you, where you find yourself sometimes spontaneously being that source of support or that guide, and maybe it's just with a word, or maybe it's like as a mentor, or maybe it's developing some project with someone, but you end up being that source of support.
Yeah.
Which I think is it's so cool. It's so beautiful.
Well, it's a privilege, and you're playing that role that you needed, whether or not you got it, but you're helping to right that wrong in a sense. I mean, it's kind of related to something that came up while you were talking now, which is something that my wife and I say to our son sometimes, which is that we say to him, you can do hard things. And it's because often, if he's trying to, complete a sum for math, or, he's even trying to just, get the password right to get into Netflix, whatever it is, and he goes, I'll just do something else, he kind of gives up. And we try and use that as a sort of a way just to remind him that just because something is difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it or shouldn't keep on trying. There's a lot to say for being persistent and understanding that persistence is probably a good thing in life. But at the same time, I think it's a recurring theme where the more you try to avoid doing hard things, the more hard things will almost surround you in life because they require you doing them. You got to get out of bed, or you got to do this, or you got to pay the rent, and the more you avoid doing them, the harder they look, and the more kind of insurmountable they become. And I suppose also the kind of the converse is true. There's a sort of an adaptability and agility that you get from being able to kind of conquer things and to get through difficult things that do require something from you that maybe you didn't know you had inside you. And now it's like, I'm a little stronger, and now I can keep going. There's something to be said there.
Yeah, I'm picturing like, in one way of being, there's a lot of friction, right? If we refuse to do hard things, there's going to be more friction in life. Like
Right.
things are just going to feel more difficult. But when we begin to engage those things that we would
Mm.
rather not, right, as they're coming to us, we do grow our capability, right?
Mm.
And our capacity to navigate what's difficult. And I think we find ourselves living more in flow. And I actually think, as I'm saying that, that reminds me of one of Campbell's favorite quotes, which is "follow your bliss," he says, right? And he's not talking about like an ecstatic state, right? Or just, some trippy thing or whatever. He's talking about really deep contentment and what it is to live in alignment with who you are and why you're
Mm.
here. And just follow that, and then he says something like, and you'll, either put yourself or find yourself on a path. And now I may be mixing quotes, but he says, where doors will open where there were no doors. Is one of the things he says.
Mm.
This idea that I'm over here, I'm like pounding on these doors because I'm convinced that this is what needs to happen. And maybe it even knocks them down, but that's all come at a cost. Instead, what if I expand my awareness and I'll notice I've been knocking on this door and there's actually like three open ones over here that
Yeah.
I can effortlessly move through. And then it might not look like it's where I want to go, but actually leads to something far greater than I could have imagined. So, really at the end of the day, this hero's journey framework, um, I think it's such a gift because it is about inviting us not to sort of live in a way that's clinging to our own agenda and expectations, which can often lead to very much is the source of suffering when
Mm.
things don't go according to our plan. And instead, like, surrender, open up to the vastness of who we really are,
Mm.
and to, to what wants to flow through us. And this doesn't happen overnight. This is a long journey, but to live in alignment with that deeper part of who you are, like that's the greatest treasure. And that's
Yeah.
the gift to give as well.
Mm. Mm. Which is also why it's worth being hard. Because perhaps
Yes.
we wouldn't appreciate it if it was, as easy as updating a status on Instagram or, something like that. Perhaps it needs to be hard in order to be appreciated. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that necessary surrender involved.
The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Another great Campbell line right there. It's
Beautiful.
like that says it all.
Maybe to close us off, to bring us home, the title of your book is The Way Home. What is home to you? Is that a special word? Is that is it a place? Is it a state? How do you see just the idea of home?
Home is your heart. So home is who you really are. Home is, yeah, it's not a geographical place. It is not something outside of yourself. It is it is deep within you, and it is something it's our birthright. Um, we always have had it. It never leaves us, and yet as we go through life, our capacity to feel connected to that
Mm.
is we lose that, right? And so we start to look for home elsewhere. And I mean, I had home in I need the new job, or home and I need to live somewhere else, or home and like I just need to find that special person and that relationship.
Mm.
That's going to give me fulfillment. But true home is within. And we could go deeper than that and say I say that not just as this like individualistic thing. It's also, but when we connect with the deepest part of ourselves, we also find ourselves connected to the oneness, to the
Yeah.
fundamental unity of everything, right? So that source is ultimately home. But
Yes.
we begin to touch on that more and more in our lives. And yes, like we have moments all the time where we're like losing contact with that. We can find almost like sacred time and place in our own life where we can keep reconnecting with that. It becomes more and more the reality from which we live on a
Mm.
day-to-day basis. And then it means, I've used this word before, but it's like the level of capability we have to navigate anything and the sense of contentment we have, regardless of what the circumstances are. I mean, that home, then, in that sense, it can never be taken away from us. We always have it. And we begin to be people who, I mean, in a sense, it's like we're exporting that feeling of home, helping
Yeah.
others see that they too carry that within them.
Yeah, that's fabulous. The idea of home being that ultimate form of connection to yourself, but to others and everything else as well. There's something also powerful about the home being this kind of safe place, where you, once you're within the walls of home, not only can you be who you are, but you can remove those ugly clothes. You can kind of let yourself be who you are. You can you're safe to do that there. Which is, I suppose, what people do in their homes, which is also why, in a social sense, the home is traditionally it's seen as this boundary. You don't go into people's homes. There's a private and public kind of very real boundary there, which is interesting, which comes from property rights and all sorts of other things too. So the home is this social understanding of something that is inherently private. But of course, it goes deeper than that, and ultimately is a place for the heart to live. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And I think that what I love is I set out on this journey. I mean, I was called into it. I said yes, and it did take me different places geographically, but it was fundamentally an inner journey, and ultimately led me back where it led me back to myself, to this realization, like I had everything the whole time, but I needed to go through these things in order to unveil what had been there, right? And also realize that there was always so much more, and this is true for there's always so much more within you. And so you think, it's like the achiever, wow, you've done so many things. Oh, that's just the beginning. If you imagine, if you let go of that, what actually wants to emerge through you. Again, I say, it's like, doesn't mean it's going to be big and flashy, but the sense of fulfillment you will experience will make, that former achievement will pale in comparison to that.
yes.
So I don't know. I often just think, I'll close with this image. It's like, I love in Lord of the Rings when the hobbits, they all come back and they're back at, like, I don't know if it's like a Brandywine Tavern or whatever it's called. And they're sitting there and they're drinking, maybe it's pints. And no one really knows that they've been on this massive adventure, but they know. And there's this like sort of sacred knowing they share. And I mean, that is part of what it is, the journey. It's like, again, everyone, they don't know all the contours of your journey. You do, and that's beautiful and that's sacred.
Yeah.
And you can almost just sit there with a little smirk on your face and be like, wow, there and back again. The Hobbit's tale. It's like, wow, I'm there and here I am back again. And yet I feel renewed. I feel whole in a new way.
Yes. Yeah. The circle is complete. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for taking us on such a phenomenal journey today. Looking into next year, coming up for you, plans for 2026. What are you creating or manifesting, and how can people find out about it?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's definitely some writing a second book, but right now it's been really fun to continue to share this sort of pattern, hero's journey, and to help people explore that. So I work at a place called Modern Elder Academy. My role is faculty in residence. And so you can go to meawisdom.com. And basically next year, I'll be leading monthly retreats on different themes like hero's journey, um, wisdom, different themes related to wisdom. I'm going to do one about spirituality and the second half of life. So lots of different themes, but Modern Elder Academy, fantastic place. Check it out. We have 2 campuses in Santa Fe and then Baja, California, Mexico.
Yeah.
And we do online things as well, but it's quote unquote the world's first midlife wisdom school. So if you're navigating transitions or trying to figure out your purpose or want to unlock the wisdom you carry, we've got all sorts of fun opportunities. So there's that. And then people can check out benjaminkatt.com. I have what's called The Journey Within, which is a coaching, individual and group work that we do. I'll be launching another one in January, so people can learn more there.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I hope it's not the last time we'll see you on our podcast, and how we can continue to support and collaborate. So thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your magic with us today.
Yeah, Alex, thanks so much. Appreciated your thoughtfulness, your curiosity, and blessings to you and your community.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.